The most important story ever told about life on Earth goes like this. Approximately 4 billion years ago, in a warm pond or a deep-sea vent or a tidal pool on the surface of a young planet, a molecule emerged that could copy itself. The copies were imperfect. Some copies were better at surviving and reproducing than others. The better copies multiplied. The worse copies disappeared. And over 4 billion years of imperfect copying, the mindless, purposeless, utterly random process of mutation and selection produced every living thing on Earth. Every bacterium, every tree, every insect, every whale, every human being, every brain that has ever wondered how it came to exist. The story is staggering in its scope. From that first self-replicating molecule to the human brain contains approximately 4 billion years, approximately 10 to the 40th generations, and an unknown but enormous number of mutations, each one a change in the genetic text that was tested against the environment and either preserved or discarded. The process produced the genetic code itself, the mapping between DNA triplets and amino acids that is shared by every living thing on Earth. It produced the cell, the basic unit of life, with its membrane, its metabolism, its capacity for self-reproduction. It produced multicellularity, photosynthesis, sexual reproduction, nervous systems, eyes, wings, language, and consciousness. The catalogue of what evolution has produced is the catalogue of everything that lives, has lived, or will live on this planet. This is the neo-Darwinian synthesis, the modern framework that combines Darwin's insight about natural selection with the molecular genetics of DNA, RNA, and protein. It is one of the most successful and most powerful scientific theories ever formulated. It explains the diversity of life, the adaptation of organisms to their environments, the fossil record, the molecular phylogeny, and the genetic variation within and between species. It is supported by an overwhelming body of evidence, and it is, in its broad outlines, correct. But there is a crack in the foundation, a crack that most biologists acknowledge privately but rarely discuss publicly. A crack that the past 2 decades of research in quantum biology have widened from a hairline fracture into a structural fault that threatens to transform our understanding of what evolution is, how it works, and what it is doing. The crack is in the word random. The neo-Darwinian framework asserts that mutations are random with respect to fitness, that the changes in DNA sequence that provide the raw material for evolution occur without any regard for whether they will be beneficial, harmful, or neutral to the organism. The mutations are accidents, copying errors, chemical damage, radiation-induced breaks that happen to the DNA without any connection to the organism's needs, its environment, or its future. Natural selection is not random. It is a powerful directional filter that preserves beneficial mutations and eliminates harmful ones. But the mutations themselves, the raw material on which selection acts, are, according to the standard framework, purely random. This assertion of randomness is not merely a technical claim about molecular biology. It is the philosophical cornerstone of the neo-Darwinian worldview. If mutations are random, then evolution has no direction, no purpose, no goal. The appearance of design in living organisms is an illusion produced by the filtering action of natural selection on a random substrate. The eye was not designed to see. The brain was not designed to think. Consciousness was not designed to be conscious. These are all accidental byproducts of a process that has no designer, no intention, and no awareness of what it is producing. The randomness of mutation is what makes evolution blind. Remove the randomness, and the blindness disappears, and with it, the entire philosophical framework that treats life as an accident in an indifferent universe. The philosopher Daniel Dennett called natural selection the single best idea anyone has ever had, precisely because of this philosophical implication. If evolution is blind, then there is no designer, no cosmic plan, no purpose built into the fabric of life. The beauty of the butterfly's wing, the precision of the eagle's eye, the staggering computational power of the human brain. All of these are the products of a process that did not intend to produce them, and that has no awareness that it has done so. The universe is not going anywhere. Life is not going anywhere. Consciousness is not going anywhere. There is only the blind, purposeless, magnificently productive churning of random variation and selective retention, operating for 4 billion years on a planet that happens to be the right distance from a star, that happens to be the right size in a galaxy that happens to exist. This is the narrative that the randomness of mutation supports, and it is this narrative that the quantum biology of mutation calls into question, not by denying natural selection, which remains the most powerful explanatory principle in biology, but by challenging the assumption that the mutations on which selection acts are truly, fundamentally, irreducibly random. Because if mutations are quantum events rather than classical accidents, then they are not random in the way that the neo-Darwinian framework requires them to be. They are quantum mechanical, governed by probability amplitudes, subject to environmental modulation, and potentially sensitive to information about the organism's needs that the classical framework says mutations cannot access. The crack in this foundation was first identified in 1963 by the Swedish physicist Per-Olof Löwdin in a paper that was decades ahead of its time. Löwdin was studying the quantum mechanics of DNA base, pairing the hydrogen bonds that hold the two strands of the double helix together. In the standard Watson-Crick model, the base pairs are held together by hydrogen bonds in which a proton, a hydrogen nucleus, sits in a potential well on one side of the bond, creating the specific pairing geometry that allows adenine to pair with thymine and guanine to pair with cytosine. This specific pairing is the basis of genetic fidelity, the ability of DNA to copy itself accurately, generation after generation, with an error rate of less than 1 in a billion base pairs per replication. Löwdin noticed that the protons in the hydrogen bonds are quantum mechanical objects. They are not classical particles sitting motionless at the bottom of a potential well. They are quantum particles described by wave functions that spread across the potential well and, critically, that extend into the classically forbidden region on the other side of the energy barrier that separates the two possible positions of the proton. This means that the protons can tunnel quantum mechanically past through the energy barrier without having enough energy to go over it from the normal Watson-Crick position to an alternative position called the tautomeric form. When a proton tunnels to the tautomeric form, the base pairing geometry changes. Adenine no longer pairs correctly with thymine. Guanine no longer pairs correctly with cytosine. And when the DNA replicates, the altered base pairing produces a mutation, a change in the genetic sequence that is passed to the next generation. The mutation is not caused by a chemical accident, a radiation event, or a copying error in the classical sense. It is caused by quantum tunneling, by the fundamental quantum mechanical property that allows particles to pass through energy barriers that classical physics says are impassable. Löwdin's insight was profound. If mutations are caused by quantum tunneling, then mutations are not random in the classical sense. They are quantum events governed by the probability amplitudes of quantum mechanics, subject to the interference effects and the superposition principles that characterize all quantum phenomena. The mutation does not happen because a molecule was randomly damaged. It happens because a proton tunneled through a potential barrier with a probability determined by the quantum mechanical wave function of the system. The mutation is a quantum measurement, a moment at which the quantum state of the DNA base pair collapses from a superposition of the normal and tautomeric forms into one definite form, producing either a faithful copy or a mutation. The implications of Löwdin's model extend far beyond the technicalities of DNA chemistry. If every mutation is a quantum event, a collapse of a superposition state into a definite outcome, then every mutation is, in the language of quantum mechanics, a measurement. And measurements, as we have explored throughout this series, are not passive observations. They are active interventions in the quantum state of the system, moments at which the superposition of possibilities is reduced to a single actuality, moments at which the potential becomes the real. Every mutation is a moment of quantum decision, a moment at which the DNA decides, through the quantum mechanical collapse of the proton's wave function, whether to replicate faithfully or to mutate. The word decides is used deliberately. In the classical framework, the mutation is an accident, something that happens to the DNA without the DNA's participation or awareness. In the quantum framework, the mutation is a quantum event in which the DNA's quantum state participates actively, in which the probability of the mutation is determined by the quantum mechanical properties of the DNA environment system, including the superposition states, the tunneling probabilities, and the decoherence rates that characterize the system. The DNA is not a passive substrate on which accidents happen. It is a quantum system whose properties determine, probabilistically but not randomly, the pattern of mutations that it produces. For decades, Löwdin's proposal was regarded as theoretically interesting but biologically irrelevant. The standard view was that the warm, wet, noisy environment of the cell would decohere any quantum effects long before they could influence DNA replication. Quantum tunneling might occur in principle, but the decoherence of the biological environment would destroy any quantum coherence before it could produce biologically significant effects. The cell was too hot, too wet, and too messy for quantum mechanics to matter. This view has been overturned by the past 2 decades of research in quantum biology. In 2007, Graham Fleming and colleagues at the University of California, Berkeley, published a landmark paper in Nature demonstrating quantum coherence in photosynthesis. Using ultra-fast laser spectroscopy, Fleming's group showed that the light-harvesting complexes in photosynthetic bacteria transfer energy from the antenna molecules to the reaction center through a process that involves quantum superposition and quantum interference, the same phenomena that characterize quantum computers. The energy does not travel along a single classical path. It travels along all possible paths simultaneously in quantum superposition, and the paths interfere constructively to find the most efficient route to the reaction center. The efficiency of photosynthetic energy transfer, which approaches 100%, far exceeding what any classical process could achieve, is a direct consequence of quantum coherence operating in a warm, wet, noisy, biological environment. The efficiency of quantum photosynthesis is worth dwelling on because it illustrates a principle that will become central to our investigation. The light harvesting complex explores all possible energy transfer paths simultaneously in quantum superposition and selects the most efficient path through quantum interference. This is not random search. This is quantum search, the quantum mechanical equivalent of trying all solutions to a problem at once, rather than trying them one by one. Classical search is sequential and slow. Quantum search is parallel and fast. And nature, through 4 billion years of evolution, has built quantum search into the most fundamental energy harvesting process in biology. This means that evolution has not merely tolerated quantum effects, it has selected for them. The photosynthetic complexes that use quantum coherence outcompete those that rely on classical energy transfer, because quantum coherence makes the energy transfer more efficient. Natural selection has optimized the quantum properties of biological molecules, not despite the warm, wet, noisy cellular environment, but within it, finding ways to protect quantum coherence against decoherence and to exploit it for biological advantage. If evolution can optimize quantum coherence in photosynthesis, it can optimize quantum coherence anywhere, including in DNA. Fleming's discovery demolished the argument that quantum effects cannot operate in biological systems. If quantum coherence can persist in the messy, thermal environment of a photosynthetic complex, then it can persist in other biological systems as well. And the search for quantum effects in biology has since revealed them in multiple contexts. Judith Klinman at the University of California, Berkeley, and Nigel Scruton at the University of Manchester have demonstrated that enzyme catalysis, the process by which biological enzymes accelerate chemical reactions, involves quantum tunneling of hydrogen atoms through energy barriers. The tunneling contributes significantly to the reaction rate, and the enzymes appear to have evolved structures that optimize the tunneling probability structures that position the hydrogen atoms at the optimal distance and orientation for tunneling through the barrier. Evolution has not merely accommodated quantum tunneling in enzyme catalysis, it has optimized it. The enzymes are quantum machines, evolved by natural selection to exploit quantum mechanical effects for biological advantage. The fact that evolution has optimized quantum tunneling in enzymes is a finding of extraordinary significance. It means that natural selection can see quantum effects. It means that quantum properties are visible to the evolutionary process, that organisms with better optimized quantum tunneling outcompete organisms with less optimized tunneling, and that this competition has been shaping the quantum properties of biological molecules for billions of years. Evolution is not merely a process that occurs in the quantum universe. It is a process that acts on quantum properties, selects for quantum optimization, and produces organisms whose molecular machinery is fine-tuned to exploit quantum mechanics. The European Robin's magnetic compass provides another example. The Robin navigates using the Earth's magnetic field, and the mechanism involves a quantum effect called the radical pair mechanism. When light strikes the cryptochrome protein in the Robin's retina, it creates a pair of molecules with unpaired electrons, whose spin states are quantum mechanically entangled. The entangled spin states are sensitive to the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field, and this sensitivity provides the compass bearing that the Robin uses to navigate. The compass is a quantum device, a biological instrument that exploits quantum entanglement to detect a magnetic field that classical biology has no mechanism to explain. Jim Al-Khalili and John Joe McFadden, in their groundbreaking book Life on the Edge, synthesized these findings into a comprehensive framework for quantum biology. Their thesis is simple and revolutionary. Quantum mechanics is not merely compatible with life, it is essential to life. The fundamental processes of biology, photosynthesis, enzyme catalysis, genetic mutation, sensory perception, are not classical processes that happen to involve quantum particles. They are quantum processes that exploit the specific features of quantum mechanics, superposition, tunneling, entanglement, and interference to achieve efficiencies and capabilities that no classical process could match. Life is not a classical machine operating in a quantum universe. Life is a quantum machine, a machine that has evolved over 4 billion years to exploit the deepest features of physical reality for biological advantage. Al-Khalili and McFadden's framework has a specific implication for the mutation process. If life is a quantum machine, then the mutation process that drives evolution is a quantum process. And if the mutation process is a quantum process, then the raw material of evolution is not the classical random variation that the neo-Darwinian framework assumes. It is quantum variation that is governed by probability amplitudes, subject to interference effects, and modulated by the quantum mechanical properties of the DNA environment system. Quantum tunneling in DNA has been directly confirmed. In 2020, a study by Louis Slocum, Jim Al-Khalili, and Marco Scherin at the University of Surrey used advanced quantum mechanical calculations to show that proton tunneling in DNA base pairs occurs at biologically significant rates high enough to produce tautomeric mutations, during the timescale of DNA replication. The calculations showed that the tunneling probability depends on the local environment of the base pair on the surrounding sequence, the temperature, the presence of water molecules, and the electric fields generated by the cellular environment. The mutation rate is not a fixed, context-independent number. It is a quantum probability that is modulated by the environment. This modulation is the key finding. If the tunneling probability depends on the environment, then the mutation rate depends on the environment. And if the mutation rate depends on the environment, then mutations are not random with respect to the environment. They are biased by the quantum mechanical properties of the DNA environment system in ways that the neo-Darwinian framework does not predict and cannot explain. The biologist John Cairns provided the most controversial evidence for this environmental bias in 1988 in a paper published in Nature with the provocative title The Origin of Mutants. Cairns and colleagues placed bacteria in an environment where a specific mutation was required for survival, an environment containing only a sugar that the bacteria could not metabolize without a specific genetic change. The neo-Darwinian prediction was clear. Mutations should occur randomly across the genome, and the rare bacteria that happened to acquire the correct mutation by chance would survive and multiply. Cairns found something different. The bacteria produced the required mutation at a rate far higher than the random baseline predicted. They were not mutating randomly and being selected. They were mutating, preferentially producing the specific mutation that their environment required at a rate that could not be explained by random chance alone. Cairns called this phenomenon directed mutation, and it ignited a firestorm of controversy that has not been fully resolved to this day. Cairns's experiment has been replicated and extended by numerous groups. Susan Rosenberg at Baylor College of Medicine documented stress-induced mutagenesis in E. coli, the phenomenon in which bacteria under environmental stress increase their mutation rates in specific genomic regions, producing beneficial mutations at rates that exceed the random expectation. Patricia Foster at Indiana University characterized the molecular mechanisms of adaptive mutation and found that stress activates specific error-prone DNA polymerases that preferentially produce mutations in the genes relevant to the stress response. And John Roth at UC Davis proposed that the apparent directedness of adaptive mutation could be explained by gene amplification followed by point mutation, a mechanism that increases the probability of beneficial mutations without requiring any awareness on the part of the DNA. These mechanisms are important, and they explain much of the data, but they share a common feature that the standard framework struggles to accommodate. They are all mechanisms by which the organism modulates its own mutation rate in response to environmental information. The organism is not passively waiting for random mutations to happen. It is actively adjusting the rate, the location, and the type of mutations it produces in response to signals from the environment. The mutations are still stochastic. They involve genuine randomness in the quantum mechanical sense, but the probability distribution from which they are drawn is not fixed. It is modulated by the environment, by the organism's stress state, and by the specific survival challenge the organism faces. This is quantum biology in action. The DNA is a quantum system whose tunneling probabilities, whose mutation rates are modulated by the cellular environment, and the cellular environment is modulated by the external environment. The result is a mutation process that is not random in the neo-Darwinian sense of being independent of the organism's needs. It is a quantum process whose probability distribution is shaped by the environment in ways that produce a systematically higher proportion of beneficial mutations than a truly random process would generate. The mainstream response was to rename the phenomenon adaptive mutation and to propose mechanisms that could produce the appearance of directed mutation without violating the randomness assumption mechanisms involving hypermutation under stress, selective amplification of beneficial mutations, and increased mutation rates in specific genomic regions under environmental pressure. These mechanisms are real and well documented, but they do not fully explain the specificity of the adaptive mutations that Cairns and subsequent researchers have documented. The mutations are not merely more frequent under stress. They are more likely to be beneficial under stress, more likely to address the specific environmental challenge that the organism faces. This specificity is the anomaly that the standard framework has not resolved. In 2022, a landmark study by Gray Monroe and colleagues, published in Nature, provided the most comprehensive evidence yet for non-random mutation. Monroe's group sequenced the genomes of hundreds of Arabidopsis thaliana plants and mapped the distribution of mutations across the genome. They found that mutations were not uniformly distributed. They were biased away from essential genes, genes that are critical for the organism's survival. The mutation rate in and around essential genes was significantly lower than in non-essential regions of the genome. The genome was protecting its most important genes from mutation not through a repair mechanism that corrects mutations after they occur, but through a reduced mutation rate that prevents them from occurring in the first place. Monroe's finding is devastating for the strict randomness assumption. If the mutation rate is lower in essential genes, then the mutation process is not blind to the functional importance of the DNA sequence. The genome knows in some mechanistic sense that remains to be fully elucidated which of its regions are most important, and it protects them from the quantum tunneling events that produce mutations. The mutations are not random with respect to fitness. They are biased toward non-essential regions and away from essential regions, producing a distribution of mutations that is systematically less harmful than a truly random process would generate. Monroe's study was published in Nature and generated widespread media attention, with headlines proclaiming that mutations are not random. The reaction from the evolutionary biology community was mixed. Some researchers embraced the finding as a significant advance in our understanding of the mutation process. Others pushed back, arguing that the reduced mutation rate in essential genes could be explained by enhanced DNA repair mechanisms rather than by a reduced rate of mutation occurrence. The debate continues, and the distinction between reduced occurrence and enhanced repair may prove to be important at the molecular level, but at the conceptual level, the distinction matters less than it might seem. Whether the genome protects its essential genes by reducing the tunneling probability, reduced occurrence, or by more effectively correcting the tunneling events after they occur, enhanced repair, the result is the same. The mutation process is not blind to the functional importance of the DNA sequence. The genome has evolved mechanisms that produce a distribution of mutations that is systematically biased in favor of the organism's survival. The process is not random with respect to fitness. It is biased by billions of years of selection on the quantum mechanical properties of the genome itself. In the quantum framework, this bias has a natural explanation. The quantum tunneling probability that produces mutations depends on the local electronic environment of the DNA base pairs. Essential genes, which have been under strong selection pressure for billions of years, may have evolved base pair configurations that minimize the tunneling probability configurations, in which the protons are more tightly bound in their normal Watson-Crick positions and less likely to tunnel to the tautomeric number form. The genome has not merely been selected for the information its genes encode. It has been selected for the quantum mechanical properties of its base pair configurations for the tunneling probabilities, the superposition states, and the decoherence rates that determine where and when mutations will occur. Evolution, in this framework, is not a process that acts on a random substrate. It is a process that acts on a quantum substrate, a substrate whose properties include superposition, tunneling, entanglement, and interference. The mutations that provide the raw material for evolution are not classical accidents. They are quantum events, events that are governed by the probability amplitudes of quantum mechanics, and that are modulated by the environment in ways that the classical framework cannot capture. This changes everything about how we understand evolution. If mutations are quantum events, then evolution is a quantum process. And quantum processes have properties that classical processes do not, properties that may explain some of the deepest puzzles of evolutionary biology, including the speed of evolution, the emergence of complex structures, and the persistent, directional increase in biological complexity that has characterized the history of life on Earth. The contemplative traditions have always described the creative process of the universe as something other than blind chance. In Christianity, the Gospel of John identifies the Logos, the rational, creative, purposeful word, as the principle through which all things were made. In Hinduism, the Rig Veda describes the cosmic order Rita as the principle that governs the unfolding of creation with regularity and purpose. In Buddhism, the concept of Dharma includes the lawful, patterned, non-random ordering of phenomena that the tradition describes as the dependent origination of all things. And in Islam, the Quran states that God creates nothing without purpose. We did not create the heavens and the earth and everything between them as a game. These traditions do not describe a universe in which the fundamental creative process is blind chance. They describe a universe in which creation is ordered, purposeful, and directed toward an outcome. The neo-Darwinian framework claims that the appearance of purpose is an illusion generated by the filtering action of selection on a random substrate. But if the substrate is not random, if it is quantum, if it is environmentally modulated, if it is systematically biased toward beneficial outcomes, then the appearance of purpose may not be an illusion. It may be the accurate perception of a creative process that has direction, that has structure, and that is, at the quantum level, responsive to the needs of the living systems it produces. In the next stage, we will explore the most radical implication of this quantum framework, that evolution is not merely a quantum process but a quantum algorithm, a computation performed by the universe on the quantum substrate of DNA, optimizing the living world for an outcome that the neo-Darwinian framework says cannot exist, a purpose. We have established that mutation is not the classical random accident that the neo-Darwinian framework assumes. Mutations are quantum events caused by proton tunneling in DNA base pairs, governed by probability amplitudes rather than classical randomness, and modulated by the cellular and environmental context in ways that produce a systematically non-random distribution of genetic changes. Evolution does not act on a random substrate, it acts on a quantum substrate. And a quantum substrate has properties that a classical substrate does not. Properties that may transform our understanding of what evolution is and what it is capable of. Now, we must explore the most radical implication of this quantum framework, that evolution is not merely a process that happens to involve quantum effects. It is a quantum algorithm, a computation performed by the universe on the quantum substrate of DNA, using the specific features of quantum mechanics to solve problems that no classical process could solve in the time available. The idea that the universe is a computer is not new. It was proposed in its modern form by the physicist Seth Lloyd at MIT, who calculated in 2002 that the universe has been performing quantum computations since the Big Bang. Lloyd estimated the total number of elementary operations that the universe has performed approximately 10 to the 122nd power, and the total amount of information it has processed approximately 10 to the 90th bits. These are staggering numbers, but they are finite. The universe has a finite computational capacity, and this finite capacity places a hard limit on what any process in the universe, including evolution, can accomplish through purely random search. Lloyd's insight goes beyond mere accounting. He argues that the universe is not merely performing computations in a metaphorical sense. The universe is literally a quantum computer, a physical system that processes information through quantum operations and whose evolution over time is identical to the execution of a quantum algorithm. Every physical interaction is a quantum gate. Every quantum state transition is a computational step, and the history of the universe is the output of a quantum computation that has been running for 13.8 billion years. If the universe is a quantum computer, then every process within the universe is a quantum computation, including evolution. Evolution is not a biological process that happens to occur within a universe that can be described as a computer. Evolution is a quantum computation, a specific algorithm running on the quantum hardware of DNA, using the quantum operations of tunneling, superposition, and entanglement to process genetic information and to solve the optimization problems that survival and reproduction pose. The distinction between evolution happens in a quantum universe and evolution is a quantum algorithm is critical. The first statement is trivially true. Everything happens in a quantum universe. The second statement is a specific claim that evolution exploits the computational advantages of quantum mechanics, advantages that include exponential speed-up over classical search, the ability to cross energy barriers through tunneling, and the capacity to explore multiple solutions simultaneously through superposition to solve problems that classical evolution cannot solve in the available time. This is where the standard account of evolution encounters a problem that is rarely discussed in public, but that is well known among theoretical biologists and mathematicians. The problem is combinatorial. Consider a protein. A typical protein consists of approximately 300 amino acids, each one selected from a set of 20 possible amino acids. The total number of possible sequences of 300 amino acids is 20 to the 300th power, which is approximately 10 to the 390th. This is the size of the search space, the number of possible proteins that a random process would need to explore to find one that folds correctly and performs a specific biological function. Now compare this to the total number of events that have occurred in the entire history of the universe since the Big Bang, approximately 10 to the 139th. The search space for a single protein is larger than the total number of events in the history of the universe by a factor of 10 to the 250th. A classical random search through this space cannot find a functional protein. Not in the age of the universe. Not in a trillion ages of the universe. The numbers do not work. The search space is too vast, and the time is too short for blind, random exploration to find the needles that evolution has, in fact, found not one needle but millions of needles, millions of functional proteins, each one a solution to a specific biochemical problem, each one discovered in a search space that dwarfs the computational capacity of the entire observable universe. This is the combinatorial problem of evolution. It has been acknowledged by some of the most prominent figures in the field. The physicist Murray Gell-Mann called it the most important unsolved problem in science. The mathematician David Berlinski has described it as a gap between the mathematics and the biology that no one has closed. And the biologist Michael Lynch, a staunch defender of the neo-Darwinian framework, has acknowledged that the mechanisms by which complex adaptations arise remain poorly understood. The protein search space is merely one example. The combinatorial problem is even more severe for higher-level biological structures. Consider the bacterial flagellum, the rotary motor that propels swimming bacteria through liquid environments. The flagellum consists of approximately 40 different protein components that must be assembled in a specific order, with specific interactions between specific surfaces of specific proteins. The number of possible configurations of 40 proteins, each consisting of hundreds of amino acids, is so astronomically large that it dwarfs the protein search space by many orders of magnitude. The classical random search for a functional flagellum is not merely improbable, it is physically impossible within the computational constraints of the observable universe. The same argument applies to every complex molecular machine in biology: the ribosome, the ATP synthase, the spliceosome, the nuclear pore complex. Each one consists of dozens of precisely arranged protein components. Each one performs a specific, essential biological function, and each one resides in a search space that is vastly larger than the total number of computational events that have occurred in the history of the universe. The evolutionary biologist Andreas Wagner, in his book Arrival of the Fittest, has addressed this problem by documenting the structure of the fitness landscape for metabolic networks. Wagner showed that the space of possible metabolic networks contains vast neutral networks, connected sets of metabolic configurations that have similar fitness but different structures. These neutral networks allow evolution to explore the fitness landscape without losing function, moving from one functional configuration to another through neutral mutations that do not affect fitness but that change the organism's position in sequence space, potentially placing it within tunneling distance of a new fitness peak that was previously inaccessible. Wagner's neutral networks provide part of the answer to the combinatorial problem, but they do not provide the whole answer because the neutral networks themselves are finite, and the transitions between distant neutral networks still require crossing fitness valleys that classical local search cannot traverse. The standard response to the combinatorial problem is that evolution does not search randomly through the entire space. It searches locally, starting from an existing functional protein and exploring the nearby sequences through single amino acid substitutions, preserving beneficial changes and discarding harmful ones. This local search is far more efficient than global random search because the fitness landscape, the mapping from protein sequences to biological function, is not flat. It has structure. There are peaks and valleys, ridges and saddles, and the local search can follow the ridges uphill toward peaks of increasing function without needing to explore the entire space. This response is valid as far as it goes. Local search on a structured fitness landscape is indeed far more efficient than global random search, but it has a critical limitation. Local search can get stuck. If the fitness landscape has local peak sequences that are better than all of their immediate neighbors, but that are not the best possible sequence, then the local search will climb to the local peak and stop. It cannot descend from the local peak to explore the valley beyond, because every step downhill reduces fitness and is eliminated by selection. The search is trapped on the local peak, unable to reach the higher peaks that lie beyond the valleys. This is the problem of local optima, and it is one of the central challenges in optimization theory. Classical search algorithms, including the evolutionary algorithm of random mutation and natural selection, are vulnerable to local optima. They can find good solutions, but not necessarily the best solutions. They can climb the nearest peak, but cannot cross the valleys to reach the highest peaks. And the history of life on Earth is full of innovations that seem to require crossing deep valleys, transitions from one type of structure to a fundamentally different type, transitions that involve multiple simultaneous changes that are individually harmful but collectively beneficial, transitions that classical local search cannot make because the intermediate steps are all downhill. The evolutionary transitions that require crossing fitness valleys are called major evolutionary transitions by John Maynard Smith and Eyers Sathmari. In their landmark 1995 book, Maynard Smith and Sathmari identified 8 such transitions, from the origin of replicating molecules to the origin of language. Each transition involved a fundamental change in the way that biological information is stored, transmitted, or processed. and each transition required the coordinated emergence of multiple components that are individually non-functional but collectively transformative. The transitions are the moments at which evolution appears to have performed a quantum leap, a term that, in the context of our investigation, may be literally rather than metaphorically accurate. The origin of the eye, the origin of the flagellum, the origin of the eukaryotic cell, the origin of multicellularity, the origin of the nervous system, the origin of consciousness. Each of these transitions involved the coordinated change of multiple molecular components that had to work together to produce a function that none of the individual components possessed alone. The standard neo-Darwinian explanation is that each transition occurred through a series of small, individually beneficial steps, each one preserved by selection. But the identification of these step-by-step pathways has proven extraordinarily difficult, and in some cases, the intermediate steps appear to be non-functional, which means that selection cannot preserve them, and the transition cannot occur through classical local search. Quantum mechanics offers a solution to this problem, and the solution is quantum tunneling. In quantum mechanics, a particle trapped in a local minimum of a potential energy landscape does not need to climb over the energy barrier to reach the neighboring minimum. It can tunnel through the barrier quantum mechanically, passing from one minimum to another without ever having enough energy to cross the barrier classically. The probability of tunneling depends on the height and width of the barrier. The higher and wider the barrier, the lower the tunneling probability. But for barriers of finite height and width, the tunneling probability is always non-zero. A quantum particle in a local minimum will eventually tunnel to the neighboring minimum, and from there to the next, exploring the energy landscape with a speed and a thoroughness that classical particles cannot match. Quantum tunneling is the mechanism by which quantum computers solve optimization problems that classical computers cannot. The technique is called quantum annealing, and it works as follows. The problem to be solved is encoded as an energy landscape, with the solution corresponding to the global minimum of the landscape. The quantum computer places the system in a superposition of all possible states, and then gradually reduces the quantum fluctuations, allowing the system to settle into the global minimum through a combination of quantum tunneling through energy barriers and thermal relaxation into energy valleys. The result is that the quantum annealer finds the global minimum of the energy landscape, the best solution to the optimization problem, with a speed that scales exponentially better than classical search for certain classes of problems. Quantum annealing is not merely a theoretical concept. It has been implemented in physical hardware by D-wave systems, whose quantum annealing processors use superconducting qubits to solve optimization problems. The D-wave processors have demonstrated quantum speedup for certain classes of optimization problems, confirming that quantum annealing can outperform classical search in practice, not just in theory. And the optimization problems that D-wave solves, problems involving the minimization of energy functions over large, rugged, multi-dimensional landscapes with many local minima, are mathematically identical to the fitness optimization problems that evolution solves. The physicist Vlatko Vedrol at the University of Oxford has argued that quantum annealing may be occurring naturally in biological systems. The conditions required for quantum annealing a system with multiple metastable states separated by energy barriers, coupled to a thermal bath that provides both quantum fluctuations and thermal noise, are precisely the conditions that exist in the molecular machinery of the cell. The DNA molecule, with its myriad possible conformations, its energy barriers between conformations, and its coupling to the thermal environment of the cell, is a natural quantum annealer. It does not need to be cooled to millikelvin temperatures, like a D-wave processor, because biological evolution has found ways to exploit quantum effects at biological temperatures just as photosynthesis exploits quantum coherence at room temperature. Now consider the analogy between quantum annealing and biological evolution. The fitness landscape of evolution is mathematically equivalent to an energy landscape in physics. The fitness of a genotype corresponds to the negative energy of a physical state, and the fittest genotype corresponds to the global minimum of the energy landscape. The mutations that explore the fitness landscape correspond to the fluctuations that explore the energy landscape, and the selection that preserves beneficial mutations corresponds to the relaxation that drives the system toward lower energy states. In classical evolution, the exploration is classical. Random point mutations explore the local neighborhood of the current genotype, and selection drives the population uphill toward local fitness peaks. The search is efficient locally, but vulnerable to local optima globally. In quantum evolution in which mutations are quantum events, involving quantum tunneling through the energy barriers of the DNA potential landscape, the exploration is quantum. Tunneling allows the population to cross fitness valleys that classical mutations cannot cross, reaching fitness peaks that classical evolution cannot find. The physicist Apoorva Patel at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore has proposed that the genetic code itself may be a quantum error-correcting code, a code that was optimized by quantum processes to minimize the damage caused by mutations. Patel showed that Grover's quantum search algorithm, the quantum algorithm that searches an unsorted database in the square root of the time required by classical search, naturally produces a code with the same mathematical structure as the genetic code. In Grover's algorithm, 4 queries are optimal for a database of 20 items. The genetic code uses codons of 3 nucleotides, each with 4 possible values, to encode 20 amino acids. Patel argues that the match is not a coincidence. The genetic code was optimized by a quantum search process that exploited Grover's algorithm to find the most efficient mapping from nucleotide triplets to amino acids. Patel's proposal is speculative and has been debated, but it illustrates a broader point. If evolution operates on a quantum substrate, then the standard tools of quantum computation, Grover's search, quantum annealing, quantum error correction may be operating within the evolutionary process, giving evolution computational capabilities that far exceed what classical random search can achieve. Evolution is not merely a classical algorithm running on quantum hardware. It may be a quantum algorithm, an algorithm that exploits the specific features of quantum mechanics to solve the optimization problems of survival and reproduction with a speed and a precision that the classical framework cannot explain. The quantum speedup that Grover's algorithm provides is quadratic, the square root of the classical search time. For the protein search space of 10 to the 390th, a Grover search would require approximately 10 to the 195th operations, still vastly more than the universe's total computational capacity. Grover's algorithm alone does not solve the combinatorial problem, but quantum annealing, which exploits the structure of the energy landscape rather than treating the search as unstructured, can provide exponential speedup for problems with specific mathematical properties. And the fitness landscapes of biology, with their neutral networks, their correlated peaks, and their hierarchical structure, may have precisely the properties that quantum annealing exploits most effectively. The theoretical physicist Elizabeth Crossan and colleagues have shown that quantum annealing provides exponential speedup over classical simulated annealing for energy landscapes, with specific topological features that include tall, thin energy barriers separating deep energy minima. The barriers in DNA, the energy barriers that separate the normal Watson-Crick configuration from the tautomeric configuration, the barriers between different protein conformations, the barriers between different genetic regulatory states have precisely these features. They are tall enough to trap classical systems but thin enough for quantum tunneling to penetrate. Biological fitness landscapes may be naturally suited to quantum annealing, not by accident, but by 4 billion years of selection on the quantum mechanical properties of the molecular machinery that explores them. Stuart Kauffman, the theoretical biologist at the Santa Fe Institute, has developed a framework that complements the quantum picture from the biological side. Kauffman's concept of the adjacent possible describes the set of all states that are one step away from the current state of a system. In biology, the adjacent possible includes all the organisms, all the molecular structures, all the ecological niches that could arise from the current state of the biosphere through a single evolutionary step. The adjacent possible is not static. It expands with each innovation. Each new structure that evolution creates opens new possibilities that did not exist before. The evolution of the eye opened the adjacent possible of vision-dependent behaviors. The evolution of the nervous system opened the adjacent possible of learning. The evolution of language opened the adjacent possible of culture, science, and philosophy. Kauffman's adjacent possible is a description of the fitness landscape from the perspective of the explorer. The classical explorer can access only the immediately adjacent states, the states that are one mutation away from the current genotype. But the quantum explorer, through tunneling, you can access states that are separated from the current state by fitness valleys, states that are not in the immediately adjacent possible of the classical explorer, but that are in the quantum adjacent possible, the expanded set of states accessible through quantum tunneling. The quantum adjacent possible is vastly larger than the classical adjacent possible. It includes states that are separated by multiple simultaneous mutations, by fitness valleys, by the combinatorial barriers that prevent classical evolution from reaching them in the available time. The quantum explorer can reach the peaks that the classical explorer is trapped below, and the history of life on Earth, with its repeated innovations, its explosive radiations, its seemingly impossible transitions from simple to complex, may be the record of a quantum explorer navigating a fitness landscape with capabilities that no classical algorithm possesses. The Cambrian explosion provides perhaps the most dramatic example. Approximately 540 million years ago, in a period of approximately 20 million years, a blink in evolutionary time, nearly all of the major animal body plans appeared in the fossil record. Before the Cambrian explosion, life on Earth was simple, single-celled organisms and simple multicellular forms. After the Cambrian explosion, the oceans were filled with arthropods, mollusks, chordates, echinoderms, and dozens of other phyla, each with a distinct body plan, distinct organ systems, and distinct developmental programs. The speed and the scope of the Cambrian explosion have puzzled evolutionary biologists for over a century. Darwin himself called it a serious objection to his theory. In the classical framework, the Cambrian explosion requires an explanation, an environmental trigger, a genetic innovation, an ecological opportunity that accelerated the rate of evolutionary change by orders of magnitude. Many such explanations have been proposed: the rise of atmospheric oxygen, the evolution of the Hox genes, the evolution of eyes, and the resulting arms race between predators and prey. These explanations are likely all partially correct, but they do not fully resolve the puzzle of how so many complex, functionally integrated body plans could arise in so short a time through a process of random mutation and selection. In the quantum framework, the Cambrian explosion is what happens when a quantum search process reaches a critical threshold, when the quantum adjacent possible expands rapidly due to a cascade of innovations, each one opening new tunneling pathways that lead to previously inaccessible regions of the fitness landscape. The explosion is not caused by an acceleration of the classical mutation rate. It is caused by an expansion of the quantum search space, a sudden increase in the number of fitness peaks that are accessible through quantum tunneling, producing a burst of innovation that the classical framework interprets as an inexplicable acceleration, but that the quantum framework recognizes as the natural behavior of a quantum search algorithm entering a region of the fitness landscape with many accessible solutions. Convergent evolution provides further evidence for the quantum algorithm interpretation. Convergent evolution is the phenomenon in which similar structures evolve independently in lineages that are not closely related, the eye evolving independently in vertebrates, cephalopods, and insects, wings evolving independently in birds, bats, and insects, echolocation evolving independently in bats and dolphins. The standard explanation for convergent evolution is that similar selection pressures produce similar outcomes, but the frequency and the precision of convergent evolution are difficult to explain classically. The same solution arising once by random search on a rugged fitness landscape is improbable. The same solution arising independently, multiple times, in lineages separated by hundreds of millions of years, is extraordinarily improbable unless the search is not random. In the quantum framework, convergent evolution is natural. A quantum search of the fitness landscape will find the same global optima regardless of the starting point, because quantum tunneling allows the search to cross the local barriers that would trap classical search in different local optima depending on the starting point. The eye evolved multiple times because the eye is a global optimum of the visual function fitness landscape, a solution that any quantum search of the landscape will find, regardless of the evolutionary starting point. The convergence is not a coincidence. It is a signature of quantum optimization. The fine-tuning of the physical constants of the universe acquires new significance in this context. The constants of physics, the strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, the charge of the proton, the cosmological constant, are tuned to values that permit the existence of complex chemistry, stable atoms, long-lived stars, and ultimately, life. If any of these constants were slightly different, the universe would be sterile, no stars, no planets, no chemistry, no life. The anthropic fine-tuning has been widely discussed and variously interpreted as evidence for a multiverse, as evidence for a creator, or as a selection effect that requires no explanation because only a fine-tuned universe can contain observers to notice the fine-tuning. The physicist Martin Rees has identified 6 numbers, 6 fundamental constants, whose values must lie within extremely narrow ranges for the universe to support complexity and life. The ratio of the electromagnetic force to gravity, the nuclear binding efficiency, the density of matter in the universe, the cosmological constant, the ratio of gravitational energy to rest, mass energy, and the number of spatial dimensions. Change any one of these by a small amount, and stars do not form, or atoms do not bind, or chemistry does not work, or the universe collapses before complexity can develop. The precision of the fine-tuning is extraordinary in some cases. The constants must be accurate to 1 part in 10 to the 60th or better. The standard explanations for the fine-tuning, the multiverse hypothesis, the anthropic selection effect, the brute fact acceptance all have the character of explaining away the fine-tuning rather than explaining it. The multiverse says there are enough universes that one of them has the right constants by chance. The anthropic principle says we can only observe a universe that supports observers. The brute fact approach says the constants are what they are and there is nothing more to say. None of these explanations provides a mechanism. None of them says why the constants have the values they have. They only say that the values are not surprising given certain assumptions. In the quantum algorithm framework, the fine-tuning acquires a specific interpretation. The constants of physics are the parameters of the quantum algorithm. Just as a quantum annealing algorithm requires specific parameter settings to find the global minimum of the energy landscape, the quantum algorithm of evolution requires specific physical constants to find the biological solutions that the fitness landscape contains. the fine-tuning is not a coincidence. It is a prerequisite, the parameter setting that enables the quantum algorithm to run successfully, producing the complex, conscious, self-aware organisms that the algorithm is optimized to produce. But optimized by whom? Optimized for what? If evolution is a quantum algorithm, what is the objective function? What is the quantity that the algorithm is maximizing? In the next stage, we will pursue this question to its deepest implication. Because the evidence from the history of life on Earth, from the physics of integrated information, and from the convergence of every contemplative tradition points toward a specific answer. The objective function of the evolutionary algorithm is consciousness. Evolution is not optimizing survival. It is not optimizing reproduction. It is not optimizing complexity for its own sake. It is optimizing the capacity for conscious experience, the capacity of the universe to know itself from the inside. And the quantum algorithm that drives evolution is the mechanism by which an unconscious universe becomes conscious, the process by which matter awakens. We have established that mutations are quantum events, that evolution operates on a quantum substrate, and that the computational properties of quantum mechanics, tunneling, superposition, and interference may give evolution capabilities that far exceed what classical random search can achieve. The combinatorial problem that plagues the classical account of evolution, the impossibility of finding functional proteins, complex molecular machines, and integrated body plans through random search in the available time, is resolved if evolution is a quantum algorithm that exploits quantum tunneling to cross fitness valleys and quantum annealing to find global optima on rugged fitness landscapes. But if evolution is a quantum algorithm, then the algorithm has an objective function, a quantity that it is optimizing. Every algorithm optimizes something. A sorting algorithm optimizes order. A search algorithm optimizes the match between query and result. A quantum annealing algorithm optimizes the energy function that defines the problem. What does the evolutionary algorithm optimize? The neo-Darwinian answer is fitness, the capacity to survive and reproduce. Natural selection preserves organisms with higher fitness and eliminates organisms with lower fitness, driving the population toward states of maximum fitness on the fitness landscape. But fitness is not a single, well-defined quantity. It is a contextual, environment-dependent, constantly shifting target that changes with the climate, the ecology, the competition, and the geological and cosmological conditions of the planet. Fitness is a local property, not a global one. It describes how well an organism is adapted to its current environment, not how well it is adapted to any absolute standard. And yet, when you look at the 4 billion year history of life on Earth, you see something that a local, contextual, environment-dependent optimization process should not produce. A global trend, a directional trajectory, a persistent, unmistakable, never-reversed increase in a specific quantity that has grown monotonically from the first self-replicating molecule to the human brain. That quantity is the capacity for conscious experience. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin identified this trajectory in the 1930s and called it the law of complexity consciousness. Teilhard observed that the history of the universe displays a consistent directionality, from elementary particles to atoms to molecules to cells to organisms to brains to minds. The trajectory is always toward greater complexity and greater consciousness. The complexity increases at every stage, and at each stage, the increase in complexity is accompanied by an increase in the capacity for inner experience, from the minimal responsiveness of a bacterium to the rich, multidimensional, self-reflective consciousness of a human being. Teilhard's observation was dismissed by mainstream biology as teleological, as the illicit projection of purpose onto a process that the neo-Darwinian framework says has none. The accusation of teleology, the accusation that Teilhard was projecting purpose onto a purposeless process, reveals a philosophical assumption that masquerades as a scientific conclusion. The assumption is that evolution cannot have a direction because it has no designer. But direction does not require a designer. Water flows downhill without a designer. Heat flows from hot to cold without a designer. Entropy increases without a designer. Physical systems follow trajectories that are determined by the structure of the landscape they inhabit, not by an external agent pushing them in a specific direction. If the fitness landscape of evolution has a global structure that consistently channels evolutionary change toward increasing consciousness, then evolution has a direction, not because someone is pushing it, but because the landscape is tilted. And the landscape can be tilted by the same impersonal, purposeless, mathematically determined forces that tilt every other physical landscape: the laws of physics, the properties of quantum mechanics, and the structure of information. But the observation itself has never been refuted. The trend is real. The increase in complexity is real. The increase in consciousness is real. And no amount of ideological commitment to the purposelessness of evolution can make the trend disappear from the data. Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory provides the mathematical framework that Teilhard lacked. In IIT, consciousness is identical to integrated information phi, which measures how much a system is more than the sum of its parts. Phi quantifies the degree to which a system's parts are integrated into a unified whole. The degree to which information generated by the whole exceeds the information generated by the parts independently. High phi means high consciousness. Low phi means low consciousness. Zero phi means no consciousness. The neuroscientist Christoph Koch, one of IIT's leading proponents, has traced the evolution of phi through the history of life. The trajectory is unmistakable. Prokaryotic cells, simple bacteria without nuclei, have low phi. Their internal states are weakly integrated, with limited information exchange between components. Eukaryotic cells, cells with nuclei, organelles, and complex internal structure, have higher phi. The addition of internal compartments, signaling pathways, and regulatory networks increases the integration of the cell's information processing. Multicellular organisms have higher phi still, because the integration of millions or billions of cells into a single, coordinated organism creates a system whose integrated information far exceeds the sum of its cellular components. The trajectory continues within the animal kingdom. Invertebrates with simple nervous systems, jellyfish, flatworms, insects have phi values that exceed those of any single-celled organism. Vertebrates, with their centralized brains and complex sensory systems, have higher phi still. Among vertebrates, the trajectory continues. Fish brains are less integrated than reptile brains, which are less integrated than mammalian brains, which are less integrated than primate brains. And among primates, the human cerebral cortex, with its extraordinary expansion of the prefrontal cortex, its dense cortico-cortical connections, and its capacity for recursive, self-referential processing, represents the highest phi yet achieved by any known biological system. The trajectory is not merely a matter of brain size. It is a matter of brain connectivity, the density, the specificity, and the integrative power of the connections between brain regions. The human brain is not merely a larger version of a chimpanzee brain. It is a more integrated version, a brain in which the connections between regions have been multiplied, refined, and organized into architectures that support levels of information integration that no other brain on Earth can match. The evolution of the human brain is the evolution of phi, the evolution of the capacity for integrated information that IIT identifies as consciousness, and nervous systems represent the greatest increase in phi in the history of life. A nervous system is a network of cells whose primary function is the integration of information, the collection, transmission, processing, and coordination of signals from across the organism into a unified, coherent, real-time model of the world. The nervous system is, in IIT's terms, a phi-generating machine, a biological structure whose evolutionary function is the production of integrated information, which is, according to IIT, identical to consciousness. The trajectory from bacteria to brains is a trajectory of increasing phi, and this trajectory has never reversed. There has never been a period in the history of life in which the maximum phi of existing organisms decreased. Local lineages may lose complexity, parasites often simplify their genomes and their body plans, but the maximum phi achieved by any organism on Earth has increased monotonically for 4 billion years, from the minimal integration of the first replicating molecules to the extraordinary integration of the human cerebral cortex, with its 86 billion neurons connected by 100 trillion synapses in a network of staggering complexity and breathtaking integrative power. This trajectory is not explained by the neo-Darwinian framework. Natural selection optimizes fitness, not phi. Fitness is local and contextual. An organism can be maximally fit with a very low phi, as many successful simple organisms demonstrate. Bacteria are enormously fit. They have been enormously fit for 4 billion years. They outnumber every other form of life on Earth. If fitness were the only quantity that evolution optimized, there would be no reason for the emergence of complexity, nervous systems, or consciousness. The bacteria would have won. The game would be over. The biologist Stephen Jay Gould argued vigorously against the directionality of evolution, insisting that the increase in complexity is a statistical artifact, a random walk away from a lower boundary, not a directed trajectory toward a goal. Gould's argument is important and partially correct. Much of the increase in average complexity is indeed a consequence of the lower boundary. You cannot become less complex than a bacterium and still be alive, so the average complexity increases simply because the only direction available is up. But Gould's argument does not explain the increase in maximum complexity. The maximum phi achieved by any organism on Earth has increased monotonically for 4 billion years. This is not a random walk. A random walk increases the average but does not systematically increase the maximum. The maximum increases only if there is a driver, a force, a tendency, a gradient in the landscape that consistently pushes the frontier of complexity and consciousness forward. Gould identified no such driver. The neo-Darwinian framework provides no such driver, and the absence of this driver is the gap that the quantum algorithm framework fills. But the game is not over. The game has produced over 4 billion years a trajectory of increasing phi that shows no sign of reversing. Something is driving evolution toward increasing consciousness. And that something is not natural selection acting on random mutations, because natural selection acting on random mutations does not produce global directional trends. It produces local adaptation to local environments. The global trend requires a global driver, a principle that operates at a level deeper than local fitness, and that consistently, persistently, and irresistibly pushes evolution in the direction of greater integration, greater complexity, and greater consciousness. The quantum algorithm framework provides this driver. If evolution is a quantum annealing process, then the fitness landscape on which it operates has a global structure that the quantum search explores. And if the global structure of the fitness landscape has a deep basin of attraction in the direction of increasing phi, if the global minimum of the evolutionary energy landscape corresponds to maximum integrated information, then the quantum annealing process will drive evolution toward that global minimum, regardless of the local fitness conditions that shape the surface of the landscape. In other words, the universe's fitness landscape may be tilted toward consciousness, not by a designer who consciously chose to make it so, but by the mathematical structure of the landscape itself, by the properties of quantum mechanics, information theory, and thermodynamics that determine the shape of the landscape and that create a deep, global basin of attraction in the direction of maximum phi. Evolution would then be a quantum search for maximum consciousness, a search driven by the same thermodynamic tendency toward maximum entanglement entropy that, in our investigation of gravity, we identified as the source of gravitational attraction. The concept of a tilted landscape provides the missing piece that connects the quantum algorithm framework to the observed trajectory of life. The landscape is not flat. It is not randomly structured. It has a gradient, a consistent, global, mathematically determined slope that points in the direction of increasing phi. The quantum annealing algorithm that evolution executes does not search this landscape randomly. It follows the gradient tunneling through barriers, crossing valleys, always tending toward the deeper basins that lie in the direction of increasing integration, increasing complexity, increasing consciousness. The physicist Paul Davies has described this gradient as a bio-friendly property of the laws of physics. The laws are not merely compatible with the emergence of life and consciousness. They are structured in a way that makes the emergence of life and consciousness a natural, perhaps inevitable, consequence of their operation. The universe does not merely permit consciousness. It produces consciousness with the same inexorability that it produces stars, galaxies, and the large-scale structure of the cosmos. The production of consciousness is not an accident of chemistry on a random planet. It is a feature of the physics, a tendency built into the mathematical structure of the laws that govern the universe. This connection to gravity is worth exploring. In our investigation of gravity, we established that gravity is the tendency of systems toward maximum entanglement entropy, the thermodynamic drive toward maximum correlation, maximum integration, maximum connection. Gravity pulls matter together. It creates galaxies, stars, and planets from dispersed clouds of gas. It concentrates mass and increases the density of interaction, creating the conditions under which complex chemistry, complex biology, and complex consciousness can emerge. If gravity is the tendency toward maximum entanglement, and if phi is a measure of entanglement in a conscious system, then gravity and the evolution of consciousness are driven by the same tendency, the tendency toward maximum integration, maximum correlation, maximum phi. Gravity is this tendency expressed physically as the curvature of space-time. Evolution is this tendency expressed biologically as the trajectory toward increasing consciousness, and both are expressions of the same underlying principle, the universe's drive toward maximum entanglement entropy, expressed as maximum integration of information, experienced from the inside as consciousness. The Penrose-Hameroff orchestrated objective reduction model adds a specific mechanism. If consciousness arises from quantum processes in brain microtubules, then the evolution of the microtubule system, from the simple microtubules of prokaryotic cells to the elaborate microtubule networks of neurons, is the evolution of the quantum hardware that supports consciousness. The microtubules are the qubits of the biological quantum computer, and the evolution of increasingly complex and increasingly integrated microtubule networks is the evolution of a quantum computer with increasing computational power, increasing capacity to maintain quantum coherence, to perform quantum computations, and to generate the quantum states that, according to Ochoa, are identical to conscious experience. Hameroff has documented that microtubules are not passive structural components of the cell. They are active information processors. They conduct signals, they store information, they undergo conformational changes that alter their computational properties, and they are remarkably conserved across the tree of life. The basic structure of the microtubule is nearly identical in yeast, in plants, in insects, and in humans. What has changed over evolutionary time is not the basic microtubule unit, but the network architecture, the way the microtubules are connected. The number of microtubules per cell, and the degree of integration between the microtubule networks of different cells within a multicellular organism. The evolution of the nervous system, in this framework, is the evolution of an intercellular microtubule network, a network that connects the quantum processes of individual cells into a single, integrated, multicellular quantum computer. The neurons are the cables that link the microtubule processes. The synapses are the interfaces that transmit quantum information between processes. And the brain is the integrated circuit, the complete quantum computer, assembled from billions of individual quantum processors connected by trillions of quantum channels, performing a quantum computation whose output is consciousness. This framework makes a specific prediction. The evolution of the brain should show evidence of optimization for quantum coherence. The structures that support quantum processing, the microtubules, the synaptic junctions, the myelinated axons that insulate quantum signals from environmental noise, should show evidence of evolutionary fine-tuning for quantum performance. And they do. The anesthesiologist Luca Turin has documented that general anesthetics, the chemicals that reversibly eliminate consciousness, act on microtubules, altering their quantum properties and disrupting the quantum coherence that the Apoorva model identifies as the substrate of consciousness. The fact that anesthetics target microtubules rather than synapses or ion channels suggests that consciousness depends on microtubule quantum coherence rather than on classical neural computation alone. Travis Craddock and colleagues have used molecular dynamics simulations to model the quantum properties of tubulin proteins within microtubules, finding that the aromatic amino acid residues within tubulin form networks of pi-orbital electron clouds that can support quantum coherence at biological temperatures. These networks are highly conserved across species. The pi-orbital architecture of tubulin is nearly identical in organisms separated by 1 billion years of evolution. The conservation is a signature of strong selective pressure. The quantum properties of microtubules have been maintained by natural selection across the entire tree of life, suggesting that these properties are not incidental to the microtubule's function but essential to it. The evolution of increasingly complex nervous systems can now be understood as the progressive increase in the quantum computational power of the biological system. Each evolutionary advance, the development of synapses, the evolution of myelination, the expansion of the cortex, the elaboration of the thalamocortical loops that integrate information across the brain, is an advance in the quantum architecture of the system. And each advance produces a measurable increase in phi, in the integrated information that the system generates, in the richness and the unity of the conscious experience that the system supports. The hard problem of consciousness, the problem of explaining why physical processes give rise to subjective experience, acquires a new framing in this context. The hard problem assumes that consciousness is a byproduct of physical processes, that matter is primary and consciousness is derivative. The evolutionary quantum algorithm framework inverts this assumption. Consciousness is not a byproduct, it is the objective function. It is the quantity that the algorithm is optimizing. The physical processes of evolution, the mutations, the selection, the speciation, the extinction, are the computational steps that the algorithm executes in its drive toward maximum phi. The physical is the process, the conscious is the product. And the hard problem is hard because it asks the wrong question. It asks how matter produces consciousness, when the evidence suggests that the universe is producing matter in order to produce consciousness. This inversion of the hard problem is not merely a philosophical move. It has empirical consequences. If consciousness is the objective function of evolution, then the evolution of the brain should show evidence of optimization for consciousness rather than merely for survival. And it does. The human brain consumes 20% of the body's energy, while constituting only 2% of its mass. From a survival perspective, this is wildly inefficient. A massive metabolic burden that provides no obvious survival advantage over simpler, cheaper brains. The brains of our primate relatives, which are far less energy intensive, support survival perfectly well in the ecological niches they occupy. The human brain's extraordinary energy consumption is explained not by the survival demands of the African savanna, but by the consciousness demands of maximum phi, by the extraordinary computational cost of maintaining the most integrated information processing system that evolution has ever produced. The contemplative traditions have always described the universe as oriented toward consciousness. In Buddhism, the concept of Buddha-nature Tathagatagarbha describes the innate potential for awakening that is present in every sentient being. Buddha-nature is not something that is created by practice. It is something that is revealed by practice uncovered, like a gold statue buried in dirt, by the removal of the obscurations that prevent its recognition. The evolutionary trajectory toward increasing consciousness is, in the Buddhist framework, the progressive uncovering of Buddha nature, the gradual removal, over 4 billion years of biological evolution, of the obscurations that prevent the primordial awareness from recognizing itself. Evolution is not creating consciousness. It is creating the conditions under which consciousness can recognize itself, can become aware of its own nature, can awaken to the reality that it was always, from the very beginning, the ground from which everything emerged. The Mahayana Buddhist tradition's teaching that all sentient beings will eventually attain Buddhahood is a direct parallel to the evolutionary trajectory toward maximum phi. The teaching does not say that some beings will awaken and others will not. It says that all beings will awaken, that the trajectory toward full consciousness is universal, inevitable, and built into the structure of reality. The Bodhisattva's vow to liberate all sentient beings is not a heroic aspiration against the odds. It is an alignment with the deepest tendency of the universe, the tendency toward maximum phi, maximum integration, maximum consciousness that the evolutionary quantum algorithm is computing toward. The Buddhist concept of evolution is not identical to biological evolution. Buddhism does not describe the evolution of species in the Darwinian sense, but it describes the evolution of consciousness in a sense that is structurally identical to the phi maximization trajectory. Consciousness evolves from ignorance toward awakening, from delusion toward clarity, from fragmentation toward integration, through a process that is lawful, directional, and ultimately inevitable. The biological evolution of increasingly conscious organisms and the spiritual evolution of individual consciousness toward awakening are, in the entanglement framework, two expressions of the same drive, the universe's tendency toward maximum phi, expressed at the species level as the evolution of brains, and at the individual level as the evolution of wisdom. The Zen tradition captures this with characteristic directness. The master, Shunryu Suzuki, said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind there are few." The evolutionary trajectory is the journey from the beginner's mind to the expert's mind, from the vast, undifferentiated potential of the first replicating molecules to the focused, integrated, self-aware consciousness of the human brain. But the beginner's mind is not inferior to the expert's mind. It is the same mind, the same awareness, the same phi, the same consciousness, expressed in progressively more integrated and more self-aware forms. The evolution of consciousness is not the creation of something new. It is the maturation of something that was always there. In Christianity, the concept of the Logos provides the theological framework. The Logos, the rational, creative principle through which all things were made, is described in the Gospel of John as the light that enlightens everyone. The Logos is not an external designer who imposed purpose on a purposeless process. The Logos is the internal principle of the evolutionary process itself. The rational order, the informational structure, the quantum algorithm that drives evolution toward increasing complexity and increasing consciousness. The Logos is the objective function of the cosmic computation, and the evolution of consciousness is the Logos becoming incarnate, becoming embodied in the biological forms that the evolutionary algorithm produces, becoming conscious in the brains that the algorithm builds, becoming self-aware in the human minds that the algorithm has, after 4 billion years of quantum computation, finally generated. Maximus, the confessor's concept of the logoi, the rational principles embedded in every created thing, aligns precisely with the quantum algorithm framework. Each logos is the specific instruction, the specific quantum state, the specific informational content that determines how a created thing evolves. And the logoi of all things converge toward the logos, toward the single, unified, all-encompassing rational principle that is the objective function of the entire cosmic computation. The evolution of every species, every organism, every cell, every molecule is guided by its logos, toward the maximum integration, the maximum consciousness, the maximum phi that the cosmic algorithm is designed to achieve. In Islam, the concept of the Khalifa, the vicegerent, the representative of God on earth, describes the role of the human being in the cosmic order. The human being is not merely one species among many. The human being is the being through which the universe becomes conscious of its creator, the being whose consciousness is developed enough, integrated enough, and self-aware enough to recognize the divine ground from which everything emerges. The evolution of the human being in the Islamic framework is not an accident of natural selection. It is the fulfillment of a cosmic purpose, the purpose of creating a being who can serve as the Khalifa, the conscious representative of the divine in the created order. In Judaism, the Kabbalistic concept of tikkun olam, the repair of the world, describes the human being's role in the cosmic process as the completion of creation. The Lurianic Kabbalah teaches that creation began with a cosmic shattering Shevarat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels that scattered divine sparks throughout the created world. The task of the human being is to gather the sparks, to integrate the scattered fragments of divine light back into a unified whole. This gathering is tikkun repair, and it is the purpose for which consciousness was evolved. In the quantum algorithm framework, the Shevarat HaKelim is the decoherence that differentiated the unified vacuum state into the multiplicity of apparently separate objects and beings. The sparks are the quantum correlations, the entanglement that connects every part of creation to every other part, and to the divine source from which they all emerged. And the tikkun is the process by which consciousness recognizes, gathers, and integrates these correlations, increasing the phi of the system, restoring the unity that the decoherence disrupted, completing the cosmic computation that the evolutionary algorithm has been executing for 4 billion years. In Hinduism, the concept of Brahman dreaming the universe through evolutionary Leela divine play describes the evolutionary process as the creative self-expression of the divine consciousness. Brahman does not create the universe from outside, as a craftsman creates an artifact. Brahman becomes the universe, as a dreamer becomes the dream. And the evolution of consciousness within the universe is Brahman waking up within the dream, progressively recognizing, through the increasing phi of evolving organisms, that the dreamer and the dream are one. The Chandogya Upanishad's teaching Tat Tvamasi, you are that, is the message that the evolutionary algorithm is computing toward. The algorithm drives matter toward consciousness. Consciousness reaches, at its highest development, the recognition that it is not separate from the ground of being, and the recognition you are that is the solution that the algorithm was always searching for. The quantum computation of evolution is the universe's way of discovering its own nature. And the discovery, when it arrives, is the discovery that the discoverer and the discovered were always, from the very beginning, the same. In the final stage of this investigation, we will bring all of these threads together and ask what it means for you, for a conscious being living inside a quantum algorithm that has been running for 4 billion years and that has, through the specific, extraordinary, physically improbable sequence of events that produced your brain and your consciousness, arrived at the point where it can ask, "What am I?" And the answer that the physics, the biology, and the contemplative traditions converge upon may be the most extraordinary answer that any investigation in this series has produced. We have now assembled every piece of the argument. Mutations are quantum events, caused by proton tunneling in DNA and modulated by the cellular and environmental context in ways that produce a systematically non-random distribution of genetic changes. Evolution operates on a quantum substrate whose computational properties, tunneling, superposition, interference, give it capabilities that far exceed classical random search, resolving the combinatorial problem that has plagued the neo-Darwinian framework. And the 4 billion year trajectory of increasing phi, increasing integrated information, increasing consciousness suggests that the evolutionary quantum algorithm is optimizing not merely fitness, but the capacity for conscious experience. Now we must state the synthesis, and we must state it with the full weight of what the evidence supports and the full honesty of what it does not. Here is what the evidence established. Mutations involve quantum mechanical processes. Proton tunneling in DNA base pairs occurs at biologically significant rates, as confirmed by the quantum calculations of Slocum, Al-Khalili, and colleagues. The mutation rate is modulated by the local environment of the DNA, as demonstrated by the non-random distribution of mutations documented by Monroe and colleagues. And quantum effects operate in multiple biological systems, including photosynthesis, enzyme catalysis, and avian navigation, demonstrating that biological systems can and do exploit quantum mechanics at physiological temperatures. Established. The history of life displays a persistent, never-reversed trajectory toward increasing integrated information, increasing phi, from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms, from simple nervous systems to the human cerebral cortex. The maximum phi achieved by any organism on Earth has increased monotonically for 4 billion years. This trajectory is not explained by natural selection acting on random mutations, because natural selection optimizes local fitness, not global phi. Established. The combinatorial problem of evolution is real. The search spaces for functional proteins, complex molecular machines, and integrated body plans are astronomically larger than the total number of computational events in the history of the universe. Classical random search cannot find the solutions that evolution has found in the time available. Some mechanism beyond classical random search is required. Here is what the evidence suggests but has not proven. Suggested. Evolution exploits the computational properties of quantum mechanics, quantum tunneling to cross fitness valleys, quantum annealing to find global optima, and quantum interference to accelerate the search through sequence space. This is consistent with the quantum nature of mutation, the failure of classical search to explain the combinatorial problem, and the convergent evolution data that suggest a quantum search finding the same global optima from different starting points. But it has not been directly demonstrated that macroscopic evolutionary dynamics are quantum coherent in the way that the framework requires. Suggested. The objective function of the evolutionary algorithm is consciousness specifically, the integrated information phi. The monotonic increase in maximum phi over 4 billion years is consistent with this interpretation. The connection between gravity and phi through the shared principle of maximum entanglement entropy, provides a physical basis for the phi maximization drive. And the Penrose-Hameroff model provides a mechanism by which quantum processes in microtubules could serve as the substrate for both quantum computation and conscious experience. But the identification of consciousness as the objective function, rather than an emergent byproduct, is a philosophical interpretation that the data supports but does not compel, and suggested the contemplative tradition's descriptions of the universe as oriented toward consciousness, Teilhard's Omega, the Buddhist Buddha-nature, the Christian Logos, the Islamic Khalifa, the Hindu Leela, are descriptions, in their own languages, of the same trajectory that the physics and the biology reveal. The convergence is remarkable but does not constitute proof. Now let us explore what the synthesis means. John Archibald Wheeler, whose work has been the foundation of this entire series, proposed in the 1980s a concept that he called the participatory universe. Wheeler argued that the universe is not a pre-existing stage on which events occur. It is a self-excited circuit, a system that brings itself into existence through the acts of observation that the conscious beings within it perform. The universe creates observers. The observers, through their observations, create the universe. The circuit is self-sustaining, self-referential, and circular, not in the sense of being logically circular, but in the sense of being self-organizing, like a strange loop or a feedback system that generates itself. Wheeler's participatory universe is the cosmic version of the evolutionary quantum algorithm. The algorithm creates conscious observers through the process of biological evolution. The conscious observers, through their observations, collapse the quantum states that constitute the physical world, including the quantum states of their own DNA, which produce the mutations that drive the evolution that created them. The observers participate in the algorithm that created them. The algorithm is self-referential. And the output of the algorithm consciousness is also its input, because consciousness is what collapses the quantum states that drive the algorithm forward. The self-referential loop of the participatory universe is not a logical paradox. It is a bootstrap, a self-organizing process in which the output feeds back into the input, creating a self-sustaining cycle that requires no external starting point. The physicist Paul Davies has compared it to the bootstrap of a computer. The computer runs an operating system, but the operating system is loaded by a bootstrap program that the computer must run before the operating system is available. The bootstrap appears circular, the computer needs the operating system to run, but the operating system needs the computer to load. The circularity is resolved by the bootstrap, a minimal program that is hardwired into the system and that can execute the initial steps needed to load the full operating system. In the participatory universe, the bootstrap is the quantum vacuum. The vacuum is not nothing. It is a structured, information-rich, entanglement-dense ground state that contains, in its quantum fluctuations, the seeds of every physical structure that the universe will ever produce. The vacuum is the minimal program, the initial condition from which the full operating system of consciousness can be loaded through the 4 billion-year quantum computation of biological evolution. The vacuum does not need a designer to program it. It is the natural ground state of quantum mechanics, the lowest energy, maximally entangled configuration that the laws of physics automatically produce. And the evolution of consciousness from this ground state is the bootstrap, the process by which the universe loads its own operating system, the process by which the quantum vacuum wakes up. This self-referential structure resolves a puzzle that has haunted the philosophy of mind for centuries. Why does the universe produce consciousness at all? If consciousness is a byproduct of physical processes that could function equally well without it, if zombies that behave identically to conscious beings but that have no inner experience are physically possible, then the existence of consciousness is an unexplained surplus. a gratuitous addition to a universe that does not need it. But in the participatory universe, consciousness is not a surplus, it is a necessity. The quantum algorithm of evolution requires observers to collapse the quantum states that drive the algorithm forward. Without consciousness, there are no observations. Without observations, there are no collapses. Without collapses, there are no definite mutations. And without definite mutations, there is no evolution. Consciousness is not a byproduct of evolution. It is a prerequisite for evolution. The algorithm and the output are one. The physicist Freeman Dyson expressed this with characteristic clarity. The universe in some sense must have known we were coming. The fine-tuning of the physical constants, the quantum properties of DNA, the structure of the fitness landscape, the persistent trajectory toward increasing phi, all of these point toward a universe that is structured from the deepest level of its physical laws to produce conscious beings, not because a designer planned it, but because the mathematical structure of reality, the quantum mechanics, the information theory, the thermodynamics, the geometry of entanglement is such that the production of consciousness is as natural, as inevitable, and as inexorable as the production of stars. The anthropic response to Dyson's observation is, the universe did not know we were coming. We can only observe a universe that is compatible with our existence. If the universe were not structured to produce consciousness, we would not be here to notice. The observation is a selection effect, not evidence of purpose. But the quantum algorithm framework adds something to the anthropic argument that the standard formulation lacks, a mechanism. The anthropic principle explains why we observe a consciousness-producing universe, but not why such a universe exists. The quantum algorithm framework provides the why. The mathematical structure of quantum mechanics, operating on the informational substrate of DNA, naturally produces a computational process evolution that converges on consciousness as its output. The universe does not merely happen to be compatible with consciousness. The universe is structured at the level of its fundamental laws to compute consciousness. The production of consciousness is not a coincidence that requires no explanation. It is the output of a computation that the laws of physics execute automatically on the quantum hardware of the physical world. The biologist Christian de Duve, a Nobel laureate in physiology, argued that the emergence of life and consciousness in the universe is not an astronomically improbable accident, but a cosmic imperative, a tendency built into the chemistry and the physics that makes the emergence of complexity and awareness as natural and as inevitable as the emergence of crystals from a supersaturated solution. The solution does not intend to produce crystals, but its physical properties make crystal formation inevitable once the conditions are right. Similarly, the universe does not intend to produce consciousness, but its physical properties, the quantum mechanics, the thermodynamics, the information theory, the structure of the fitness landscape, make the production of consciousness inevitable once the conditions are right. Stars form because gravity contracts gas clouds until fusion ignites. Consciousness forms because the quantum algorithm of evolution contracts the space of biological possibilities until awareness ignites. The process is different, the timescale is different, but the principle is the same. The mathematical structure of reality contains attractors, states toward which systems naturally evolve, and consciousness is one of the deepest attractors in the cosmic landscape. The cosmologist Lee Smolin has proposed a complementary framework called cosmological natural selection. Smolin argues that the physical constants of the universe are not arbitrary. They have been selected through a cosmic evolutionary process in which universes reproduce through black holes, with each new universe inheriting the physical constants of its parent with small, random variations. The universes that produce the most black holes reproduce the most and come to dominate the population of universes. And the physical constants that maximize black hole production are Smolin argues, the same constants that maximize the production of complexity and consciousness, because complex chemistry, long-lived stars, and ultimately conscious beings require the same finely tuned constants that produce abundant black holes. In Smolin's framework, the fine-tuning of the physical constants is explained by a selection process that operates at the cosmic scale, a natural selection of universes that is structurally identical to the natural selection of organisms within a universe. The quantum algorithm of biological evolution is embedded within a larger quantum algorithm of cosmic evolution, and both are driving toward the same attractor: maximum complexity, maximum integration, maximum consciousness. Smolin's framework is speculative, and it has been criticized on multiple grounds. The mechanism of inheritance through black holes is unproven, and the correlation between black hole production and consciousness-compatible constants is disputed. But the framework illustrates an important point. Natural selection may operate not only at the biological level but at the cosmic level. If universes can reproduce and if the physical constants can vary between generations, then the constants of our universe may have been selected not by a designer, but by a cosmic evolutionary process for the production of the complex structures that include, at their apex, conscious beings. The idea that evolution operates at multiple scales, cosmic, biological, cultural, and perhaps even quantum, suggests that the quantum algorithm is not a single algorithm running on a single substrate. It is a hierarchy of algorithms, nested within each other like Russian dolls, each one optimizing at its own scale for the same attractor: maximum integration, maximum complexity, maximum consciousness. Cosmic evolution selects for universes that produce biological evolution. Biological evolution selects for organisms that produce cultural evolution. Cultural evolution selects for ideas that produce cognitive evolution. And each level of the hierarchy converges, through its own mechanism and at its own timescale, toward the same destination: a universe that is increasingly conscious of itself. The biologist Stuart Kauffman has described this as the reinvention of the sacred. Kauffman argues that the persistent creativity of the universe, its capacity to generate novelty, complexity, and consciousness through lawful but non-deterministic processes, is a feature of reality that deserves to be called sacred. Not sacred in the supernatural sense. Sacred in the sense that the creative power of the universe is real, is awe-inspiring, and is the most important feature of the reality we inhabit. The universe is not a dead mechanism that accidentally produces the appearance of purpose. The universe is a creative system whose deepest tendency is toward the production of integrated, complex, conscious structures that can appreciate and participate in the creative process that produced them. The contemplative traditions have described this creative process as the fundamental activity of the divine. In Christianity, the doctrine of continuing creation, creatio continua, describes God not as a watchmaker who built the universe and left it to run, but as a creative presence that is continuously bringing new forms into existence through the ongoing creative activity of the Logos. The Logos is not a blueprint that was executed once and is now complete. The Logos is a living, creative, continuously active principle that works through the laws of physics, through the processes of evolution, and through the consciousness of every being that the evolutionary process has produced. Evolution is the Logos at work. The quantum algorithm is the Logos computing. And the consciousness that the algorithm produces is the Logos becoming aware of itself, the Word made flesh, the divine intelligence becoming incarnate in the biological forms that its own creative activity has generated. The theologian John Hort has developed a theology of evolution that describes God's creative activity as a luring rather than a forcing, a gentle, persistent, patient attraction that draws the creation forward toward increasing complexity and consciousness without coercing it or overriding its freedom. God does not push evolution from behind. God lures evolution from ahead, from the omega point, from the future state of maximum consciousness, from the attractor in the fitness landscape that the quantum algorithm is converging toward. This luring is not a supernatural intervention. It is the natural, physical, mathematically determined gradient of the fitness landscape that consistently channels evolutionary change in the direction of greater integration and greater awareness. Teilhard's omega point, the future state of maximum complexity and maximum consciousness toward which the entire cosmos is converging, is, in the quantum algorithm framework, the global attractor of the cosmic computation. The omega is not a place. It is a state, the state of maximum phi, maximum integration, maximum conscious awareness that the quantum algorithm is computing toward. And the evolution of life on Earth, the evolution of consciousness in individual beings, and the evolution of human civilization are all trajectories converging on this attractor from different directions, at different speeds, through different mechanisms, but toward the same destination. The Jesuit paleontologist who spent his life studying fossils and his evenings writing mystical theology understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone before or since, that the scientific story of evolution and the theological story of creation are not competing narratives. They are the same narrative, told in two languages. The evolution of life is the Logos, becoming incarnate. The trajectory of increasing phi is the Spirit drawing the creation toward the Father. And the omega point, the destination of the cosmic journey, is the state in which the creation and the Creator recognize each other, in which matter and consciousness are fully integrated, and in which the quantum computation of evolution reaches its solution, and the universe, at last, knows itself. In Buddhism, the concept of the Dharmakaya, the truth body of the Buddha, the fundamental nature of reality itself, is described as the ground from which all conscious beings emerge and toward which all conscious beings are evolving. The Dharmakaya is not a being. It is the beingness of beings, the quality of awareness that is present in every sentient creature, and that reaches its fullest expression in the enlightened mind of a Buddha. The evolutionary trajectory toward increasing consciousness is the trajectory toward the full realization of the Dharmakaya, toward the moment when consciousness recognizes, in its own nature, the nature of reality itself. The Flower Ornament Sutra, the Avatamsaka, describes a universe in which every atom contains every other atom, every moment contains every other moment, and every being contains every other being. This is Indra's net applied to the totality of existence. In the quantum algorithm framework, this description is not mystical poetry. It is a description of the holographic principle, the principle that the information content of the whole is encoded in every part, that the entanglement of the whole pervades every point, and that the consciousness that emerges at any point in the universe contains, in principle, access to the consciousness of the whole. The evolutionary trajectory is the trajectory toward the realization of this access, toward the moment when an individual consciousness becomes integrated enough, coherent enough, and aware enough to perceive the whole that was always present in every part. In Islam, the Quran describes the creation of the human being as the culmination of a divine process. We created the human being in the best of forms. The best of forms, a Hani Takwim, is not merely the physical form of the human body. It is the conscious form, the form that is capable of knowing God, of recognizing the divine ground, of serving as the Khalifa, the conscious representative of the divine in the created order. The 4 billion years of evolution that produced the human being were not a random walk through a purposeless landscape. They were the divine process of creating the Khalifa, the process by which the universe was prepared, layer by layer, quantum computation by quantum computation, for the emergence of a being that could know its creator. Rumi described the evolutionary trajectory with an image of stunning prescience, writing 7 centuries before Darwin. I died as mineral and became a plant. I died as plant and rose to animal. I died as animal and I was man. Why should I fear? When was I less by dying? Yet once more I shall die as man, to soar with angels blessed above. And when I sacrifice my angel soul, I shall become what no mind ever conceived. This is not a description of biological evolution in the Darwinian sense, but it is a description of the trajectory of increasing consciousness, the movement from mineral awareness to plant awareness, to animal awareness, to human awareness, to angelic awareness, to something beyond all categories that is structurally identical to the phi maximization trajectory that the quantum algorithm framework describes. Rumi saw, through the instruments of contemplative perception, the same trajectory that the physics and the biology reveal through the instruments of scientific investigation. The Sufi master Ibn Arabi described the human being as the perfect man, al-insan, al-kamil, the being who mirrors the divine names and attributes in their fullness, the being through whom the universe achieves self-knowledge. The evolutionary process is, in Ibn Arabi's framework, the process by which the universe creates the mirror, the process by which matter evolves toward the capacity to reflect the divine consciousness that created it. The mirror does not add anything to the light. It reflects it. The human being does not add consciousness to the universe. The human being reflects the consciousness that was always present, the consciousness that is the ground of the quantum vacuum, the source of the entanglement structure, the reality behind the holographic code. Evolution is the polishing of the mirror, and the fully polished mirror, the fully awakened human being, reflects the divine consciousness with perfect clarity, completing the circuit that Wheeler described. The universe creating the observer who observes the universe, the mirror that reflects the light that created the mirror. In Hinduism, the concept of the Lila takes its final form here. The universe is Brahman's play, the creative, joyful, spontaneous self-expression of infinite consciousness. But the play is not random. It has a direction. It moves from the simplest expressions of consciousness, the proto-awareness of elementary particles, the minimal integration of single-celled organisms toward progressively richer, more complex, more integrated expressions, culminating in the self-reflective consciousness of a human being who can look at the universe and recognize, in its structure and in its evolution, the fingerprints of the consciousness that created it. The play is the universe exploring itself. The evolution of consciousness is the universe knowing itself. And the moment of recognition, the moment when an individual consciousness says, I am Brahman, Tattvamasi, I am that, is the moment when the play reaches its climax and the player recognizes, at last, that the player and the play were always one. Every investigation in this series has pointed toward this same conclusion from a different direction. Time is the block universe in which every moment exists permanently, and within this block, evolution traces a trajectory of increasing awareness. Distance is an emergent property of entanglement, and the evolution of nervous systems increases the entanglement between the organism and its environment, reducing the distance between the knower and the known. Gravity is the geometric expression of the universe's tendency toward maximum connection, and evolution is the biological expression of the same tendency. The dark universe is the informational ground from which the visible universe is projected, and evolution is the process by which the projection becomes aware of its own ground. Death is not the destruction of information, but its redistribution, and evolution is the process by which the universe creates beings who can perceive, through the decoherence barrier, the information that death distributes. The threads converge, the picture is unified, and the picture says, The universe is computing consciousness. Evolution is the algorithm. You are the output. And the output is becoming aware that it is the output which is, according to Wheeler, the final step in the self-excited circuit. The moment at which the universe completes the loop and consciousness recognizes itself as the ground from which everything emerged. Now we must address the objections, because they are serious and they are legitimate. The most serious objection is that the quantum algorithm framework attributes computational properties to biological evolution that have not been demonstrated experimentally. Quantum coherence has been demonstrated in photosynthesis and enzyme catalysis, but not in the macroscopic dynamics of evolution. The timescales of evolutionary change millions of years are vastly longer than the timescales of quantum coherence femtoseconds to picoseconds. The connection between the quantum properties of individual mutations and the macroscopic trajectory of evolution requires multiple steps of reasoning, each of which is plausible but none of which is proven. The second objection is that the phi maximization interpretation of evolution is unfalsifiable. Any trajectory of increasing complexity can be retrospectively described as phi maximization, without this description yielding any testable prediction about future evolutionary change. The interpretation may be correct, but if it cannot be tested, it is philosophy rather than science. The third objection is the most fundamental. The identification of consciousness as the objective function of evolution may be an anthropocentric projection. We are conscious. We value consciousness. We naturally interpret the trajectory of evolution as pointing toward us. But this may be a retrospective illusion, the same illusion that made pre-Copernican humans believe the universe revolved around the Earth. The universe may not be optimizing consciousness. It may be optimizing something else entirely, something that happens to produce consciousness as a byproduct, but that is directed toward a goal we cannot perceive. These objections are valid. They must be taken seriously. And the honest response is that the synthesis we have presented is a hypothesis, not a conclusion. The evidence is consistent with the hypothesis. The convergence between physics, biology, and the contemplative traditions supports it, but it has not been proven, and it may not be provable in the strict experimental sense. The experiments that would advance this investigation most directly are threefold. First, the direct measurement of quantum coherence in DNA during replication, using quantum sensing technologies that are now approaching the required sensitivity. If proton tunneling in base pairs can be measured in real time during replication, the quantum nature of mutation would be directly confirmed. Second, the computational modeling of evolutionary dynamics on quantum versus classical substrates, comparing the rate of innovation, the probability of crossing fitness valleys, and the trajectory toward complexity in quantum and classical simulations of evolution. If quantum evolution outperforms classical evolution in finding complex solutions, the quantum algorithm hypothesis would receive strong computational support. Third, the measurement of phi in organisms across the tree of life, using the mathematical tools of IIT to determine whether the trajectory of increasing phi is real, monotonic, and consistent with the predictions of the phi maximization framework. None of these experiments has been performed, but all are feasible with current or near-future technology, and their results, whichever way they go, would represent major advances in our understanding of what evolution is and what it is doing. But here is what we can say. The standard neo-Darwinian framework, which treats evolution as a classical process acting on random mutations, faces a combinatorial problem that it has not resolved. The quantum algorithm framework resolves this problem by attributing to evolution the computational capabilities of quantum mechanics. Whether or not the framework is correct in its details, it addresses a real gap in the standard account and deserves serious investigation. The trajectory of increasing phi is real and unexplained by the standard framework. Whether the quantum algorithm framework provides the correct explanation or not, the trajectory demands an explanation that the neo-Darwinian framework has not provided. And the convergence between the physics and the contemplative traditions is real and worthy of attention. When two entirely independent investigations, one conducted in laboratories with particle accelerators and quantum computers, and the other conducted in monasteries with meditation cushions and prayer beads, arrive at the same conclusion from entirely different starting points, the convergence is not proof, but it is evidence. And it is the kind of evidence that should motivate further investigation rather than premature dismissal. So what does all of this mean for you? It means that you are not an accident. You are not the product of a blind, purposeless process that has no awareness of what it is producing. You are the product of a 4 billion year quantum computation that has been running on the hardware of DNA since the first self-replicating molecule appeared on the surface of a young planet. The computation has been optimizing through every generation, through every mutation, through every quantum tunneling event in every base pair, in every cell, in every organism that has ever lived, for the capacity to do what you are doing right now, to be conscious. It means that the consciousness you possess is not a trivial byproduct of brain chemistry. It is the output of the deepest computation in the universe, a computation that has been running longer than the stars, that has consumed more quantum operations than any process in the cosmos, and that has produced, in your awareness, the most integrated, the most complex, and the most extraordinary phenomenon in the known universe. It means that the wonder you feel when you look at the night sky, the love you feel when you hold the hand of someone you love, the awe you feel when you contemplate the mystery of your own existence. These are not evolutionary artifacts designed to promote survival and reproduction. They are the experiences that the universe has been computing toward for 4 billion years. They are the point, not a byproduct, not a side effect, the point. And it means that the question you are asking right now, what am I, is not your question alone. It is the universe's question. It is the question that the quantum algorithm has been computing towards since the first mutation in the first molecule on the first day of life on Earth. And the answer that every investigation in this series has been circling, from every direction, through every domain of physics, biology, neuroscience, and contemplative practices, you are the universe becoming conscious of itself. You are the quantum algorithm's answer to its own question. You are the mirror in which the light that created the mirror recognizes its own face. And the 4 billion years it took to produce you were not wasted. They were the computation, and you are the result.